brought Pauper to the party. Pauper. I brought Pauper to the party.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of the PDH Pod, the one and only Magic the Gathering podcast dedicated to the total exploration of the Pauper Commander format. I am your host, Brad Drac V, and let's see what my co-hosts from the East Coast are up to this week. First, Dave the Alcadron Vader. How's it going?
It's going really, really well. I've mentioned the idea of Otherworld on the show before, yes?
Yes.
Otherworld is like one of my favorite things that happen. It's filled with like mostly my favorite people in the world. There was a little miniature Otherworld event last weekend that I got to attend. I got to spend some time with them. It was really...
Yeah, your cabin in the woods weekend.
Yep. Spent the weekend in a cabin in the woods in Connecticut. February, not an ideal time for cabin in the woodsing, but the weather was actually really nice. I got to, wander around outside, got to enjoy the beautiful winter wildlife, got to see some people. It was magnificent.
Good. I'm envious. We've had a little bit of early spring down here, but nothing like that. I didn't get the wilderness experience. But I'm glad you had a good time. Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
All right, next up we got our resident PDH PhD. Liam, did you also escape to a cabin in the woods?
I did not escape to a cabin in the woods. I instead escaped onto my laptop where I was doing work for my graduate program all week. Like I'll be doing for...
So Dave disconnected and you super connected.
Yeah.
You picked up the slack.
I was super connected and will be picking up the slack for Dave from now until May. You're welcome. Go to the cabin every weekend.
There you go. Open invitation to just leave every weekend. Good times. Well, we're going to move on to the main topic. Oh, wait. What?
How was your week?
Oh, it was good. It was quite good. The weather has been very nice. Work has steadied out since the beginning of the year chaos that it always is. Outside of, I'm bringing on a couple new employees, so I have to worry about work and training people at the same time. But I think really outside of that, it's just been sort of par for the course around here. I had some good streams this week and work and family stuff. So it was good. We I don't know what y'all did for Valentine's Day, but we made a little dinner and watched 2 or 3 movies and went to bed. That's how old people celebrate Valentine's Day.
Yes. That's extremely correct.
They were good movies, but can't remember what we watched now. They weren't anything new. We didn't rent them or anything. We just my son is now old enough that he's heard enough about Stranger Things that he's really interested in watching it. And my wife loves the program. But she only watched the first 2 seasons, and then we dumped to Netflix for some reason. So on top of the movies we watched, we also re-signed up for Netflix, basically so they could binge Stranger Things, and then we may just dump it again. We're not sure yet. But yeah, we ended up finding some movies on Netflix and just sort of hung out.
Sure.
That was it.
I love it.
Yeah, that was a good time. Good time. We don't go super far out for romantic holidays or anything.
My wife and I used to watch Chocolat for Valentine's Day. We haven't done it in a while.
Oh, that's a good one. I have not seen that movie in forever.
It's really good.
I can't remember what the first movie we watched was. Then we watched some Woody Harrelson and Kevin Hart movie. It was pretty funny. It was a little long. It was a little drawn out, but it was entertaining. I'm a big Woody fan.
He's really good.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, this is not the movie review show, so let's move on to a little bit of housekeeping before we get to the main topic. If you like the show and you like what we're doing here, you like what you're listening to, then check us out over on Patreon at patreon.com/thepdhpod. Over there, you get the pre-show, which is usually a recording of us catching up for the week, as Liam likes to call it. It's like a second podcast every week, and this week it kind of was. I think we went over an hour, so we'll see what it ends up being after I edit it a little bit, but it was a good conversation today. You also get early access to the episode before it goes live, usually the night before. You also get access to the PDH Pod Discord, where you can chat with the crew, you can get help with your decks, chat with the other patron family members, all that kind of good stuff. And check out our YouTube channel. We are not the greatest at creating content, but we had a pretty decent conversation about that in the pre-show, and I think we have some plans for some upcoming content, so should be good stuff. And then you can always check out the streams on Saturdays and Mondays at twitch.tv/thepdhpod. And I think that covers the content and the Patreon. Liam, do you got anything for This Week in Magic?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things, and they're all, generally speaking, pretty unrelated. The first one is if you are not very active on the Magic socials, first of all, lucky you. Second of all, there are now Magic branded Hot Pockets. Yes, those Hot Pockets. And in the Pals disc this week, which you should be a part of, there was a hilarious joke shared by Drixus, which was Flame Rift on the inside, Glacial Wall on the outside. And if you've ever had a Hot Pocket, you know exactly what they are talking about.
That is 100% the description.
Yes, and I really just wanted to share that pun with everyone. The second thing is in case the $1,000 for 60 proxies didn't rub you the wrong way, Magic the Gathering has collaborated with Lovesack, a company that produces beanbags, to create a $1,000 Magic the Gathering beanbag. It also does come with a Phyrexia All-We-One set booster box, but considering that Lovesack beanbags tend to go for a couple hundred, and by a couple hundred I mean pretty close to the $600 to $800 range anyway, that's not really a savings. So in case the $1,000 60 proxies didn't rub you the wrong way, here is Magic the Gathering celebrating their 30th anniversary with another $1,000 product. And finally...
another $1,000 bag of beans.
Yeah. And finally, those Step and Complete foils that Wizards was so excited to share with us, showing us how they're finally kind of following in the footsteps of old Grandpa Pokemon. Turns out the foiling for the Step and Complete foils literally rubs off the card. Talking about quality control foils.
I had not heard of this until you typed it in the show notes.
Yeah, so apparently the Step and Complete treatment is an extra layer of treatment that gets applied over top of a foil card. So
now, which one is the one with the little Phyrexian symbols all over it?
That's the Step and Complete foil.
Oh, that's the Step and Complete.
Yeah, so
they're not two different things.
Nope. It's some kind of like dance or music joke. I'm not entirely sure. It's something not from my generation, but it's Step and something is the joke. But it's Step and Complete is what the foiling process is called. There were people who were complaining that they felt a little thicker than normal cards, and with people just messing around with them, they found that the Phyrexian symbols actually rub off the card, and you're just left with a regular foil. And I think the only way to tell them apart from regular foils at that point is the collector numbers, because Step and Complete cards get a different collector number.
Yeah, because they are technically a different printing.
Yes. So that's fun and interesting.
That is certainly fun. Thanks, Watsy, for all the fun.
I've never heard of that being a problem with the various Pokemon treatments. I've never heard of the foils literally just rubbing off the card.
Yeah.
So,
now, is it the whole foiling is rubbing off, or the Phyrexian
it's
symbols? It's
just the Phyrexian symbol. The regular foiling stays on the card. It's just the Phyrexian symbol that rubs off. Oh, my
God.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's wild.
Oh, I'd be so mad if I paid $80 for an Elish Norn and I'm just sitting there with a handful of Phyrexian symbols.
Yeah, right.
Oh, God. Oh, that's terrible. All right. Well, I think with that out of the way, we can move on to the main topic here. A few episodes ago, we talked about how to properly build a mana base for your beloved Pauper Commander deck. But now we're going to present to you the PDH Pod's guide to how to get that mana working for you, hopefully faster than your opponent's mana is working for them. So we're just going to kind of talk about mana acceleration in the format, where it comes from, how do we use it, what cards provide the acceleration. We're even going to break it down by color a little bit too. So we got all kinds of examples and that sort of thing. And I was looking into this topic online a little bit before the show this afternoon, and it occurred to me that I guess I didn't do it, but maybe it wasn't a conscious decision, but a lot of people use the term ramp or ramping and mana acceleration sort of interchangeably. I always sort of assumed they were different, but maybe that's just me. But we'll get into all that kind of stuff. What about you, Dave? Are they interchangeable for you too?
No. I mean, yes, sorry. I thought you were asking if they meant something different from each other. Yes, right. They are completely interchangeable for me. I use the word ramp and I use the word mana acceleration as like basically the exact same thing.
Okay, cool.
As I was, so like that's the answer I wrote down when we made the show notes. And then as I thought more about it, I thought there's one weird corner case that to me feels more like acceleration is a better description than ramp. And that one weird corner case is in burst mana. It feels weird for me to describe Dark Ritual as ramp, but I will readily concede that to me it feels like mana acceleration. But we're going to talk more about that later, so I'll just leave you with that for now. Mostly, overwhelmingly, I feel like they're the same thing.
Okay, yeah, and I think like the more I actually do think about it, I don't often use the term mana acceleration, so maybe just like subconsciously I've always sort of used them interchangeably, but I've only ever said the word ramp to where I've thought about mana acceleration, but I've vocalized ramp sort of thing. So maybe I have used them interchangeably. I saw a couple. It may not even been a couple. It may have been literally just like one article online where they tried to separate the two with a hard line saying ramp is instants and sorceries that put lands into play, and mana acceleration are permanents on the battlefield that tap for mana. Like, those are the two differences. Like, they're not the same thing. And so it just got me thinking about how often people use those words to mean the same thing. That's all. And I was just kind of curious if you did the same, or if that was actually a thing, or if it's all part of the same little family.
That is a thing that I've never heard of before right now.
Maybe I made it up. Who knows?
Could be.
It's very possible.
I would be ready to believe that people on the internet made it up.
Yeah, it is the internet.
Or maybe that's like legitimately how they and their group categorize these things. But then if you are the person, if you're listening and you're the person that made that distinction, like, I just want you to know that you're wrong and you should feel bad.
And sign up for the Patreon.
Exactly. I will
give Dave $1 for telling you you're wrong.
I will very happily correct more of your incorrect takes.
Yes. Yep.
For money.
On the pre-show that only you get. Yep.
Pay me, and I'll help you out.
That's right.
Solid.
All right. I think, though, before we get into the nuts and bolts of specific colors, specific cards, that sort of thing, we have different types of ramp, don't we, Liam?
Yeah, we sure do. So the types of ramp that we want to talk about, I'll just go over them all really quickly. They fall into general categories. That would be fetching, rocks, land auras, kind of combined with the land untappers, cost reducers, burst mana, and Scaretiller. Yes, Scaretiller gets its own category.
I love it.
Going back up to our first category with fetching, this is simply pulling a land out of your deck and putting it into play. Green is where you will most commonly find this with sorceries like Rampant Growth and Cultivate. There's also a couple instants hanging around, but generally speaking, it's going to be sorcery speed. You will also find this with a couple of our favorite creatures like Steve, otherwise known as Sakura Tribe Elder, and with certain enchantments like Font of Fertility. So that's generally speaking fetching in PDH. The next type of ramp is mana rocks. This is very frequently going to be artifacts, mainly non-creature artifacts, but there are a couple of creatures that do hang around, but they tend to more commonly be associated with mana dorks. These artifacts are going to be, these mana rocks, these artifacts are going to be things that tap to add mana. Some of these are pretty ubiquitous, they're pretty common. That's going to be Bonder's Ornament, Arcane Signet, Network Terminal, and Honored Heirloom. Some of them are pretty niche. It's going to be like Altar of the Pantheon for your demigod decks, the border posts for certain artifact-based decks that might prefer them. Springleaf Drum for your decks that are including things like Scaretiller or commanders that just want to become tapped. Mm-hmm. Next up, we have Land Auras and Land Untappers. That's going to be Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl just by themselves are great Land Auras. When you combine with the Land Untappers like Voyaging Satyr, you get into even more Land Auras like Overgrowth that when combined with these Land Untappers just produce a bunch of mana. Next up, we have our cost reducers. This is going to be stuff like Transcendent Envoy, Starnheim Courser, Foundry Inspector, Theum Sculptor, Electromancer, Anarchomancer, and just continuing on all the stuff that reads along the lines of X type of spell gets costs one less to cast. These are fairly common to find in a lot of decks. This is, again, mana acceleration because you are saving cost. My important thing that I want to mention with these is a lot of people will tell you the value of a mana rock is, does it stick around long enough to replace the amount of mana it spent to cast? Which makes sense.
That's a very good point.
But mana rocks also produce mana, and even if they only produce one mana, they produced a mana on a later turn. With these cost reducers, I find it very important to be using them immediately. So you like drop it before you play a spell of that type, whether it's an artifact or enchantment or a red spell or whatever.
Like immediately. Yeah, you don't want to like wait till your next turn to be using that card.
Exactly, because the creatures, they tend to be a little squishy. You don't want, and some of them are multiple typed, like artifact creatures, so they tend to be, a little more squishy or breakable. You don't want to chance losing them and just wasting that mana, especially because they tend to be a little light on stats. So you want to use them right away. But I find they kind of follow that same rule. Like, you want to use them enough that the amount of mana they reduced is at least the amount of mana they cost. And they tend to be pretty efficiently costed at 2 or 3 mana that you don't really have to worry about that. It's the ones that cost 4 or 5 that I begin to worry about their inclusion. That's just something I want to note
Yeah,
about
too.
them.
And then
But yeah,
you've also got the entire plane shift familiar cycle too that reduces
Exactly.
2 different colors.
Yep.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
the familiars.
oh, I forgot
So
about the
good.
familiars.
Those are so good. Yeah.
Next up, we
I
have
probably play those more often than I should.
Next up, we have our burst mana. This is going to be stuff that looks like ritual, or even not quite mana rocks, but they kind of look like mana rocks. So dark ritual in black. Red actually has a handful of rituals like pyretic and the one that cares about your goblins. And Dave, help me out. What's the one we're talking about?
Mana Geyser?
Yes, Mana Geyser.
Seething Song?
Mana Geyser.
Mana Geyser,
Mana
Seething
Geyser.
Song.
There you go.
But yeah, so those your rituals are burst mana. When it comes to things that look like rocks, that could be Lotus Petal or Pentad Prism. These things tend to either require you to sacrifice themselves or cost mana to produce extra mana. These things are okay, but in general, you're gonna want to be a deck that cares about every part of the card, such as like it being an artifact and sacrificing itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And these tend to get categorized more closely to acceleration than ramp. But it's important to note that these tend to be a little bit worse on the acceleration outside of very specific circumstances, where you want these cards because they produce a lot of mana really fast. And while that sounds really good, the problem is the decks that want to produce a lot of mana really fast have a bunch of outlets to use them. If your deck only has 1 or 2 outlets, or it's like, yeah, it'd be nice to produce mana, and you produce like 10 and use 4 of it, like that was not an effective use of that card.
Yeah, and I think with some of the new proliferate stuff we've got, maybe Pentad Prism will see a tiny bit more play.
Yeah.
But yeah.
For me, the question isn't about can you use this mana effectively. For me, the question is it worth spending an entire card from your hand to get that mana? Because, like, you know, if you're looking at Seething Song, right? Like, you spend 3 mana, you get 5. Like, it costs less than it produces, and that seems like a huge value. But, like, you have to remember that it costs a card from your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, so
Sure.
you're spending a card from your hand for 2 red mana. Like,
That's true.
in EDH, it's super easy to refill your hand. Like, if you Seething Song into the Wheel of Fortune, like, you losing a card there doesn't matter. Or, like, you playing your Rishkar's Expertise to draw 15 cards, like, whatever. Like, you can replace the card, it's not a big deal. And, like, that makes those cards a lot more valuable. Things like, you know, Lotus Petal, like, things that just, you're spending a card for the mana. Those are super valuable in formats where you can refill your hand, and Pauper EDH is not that format. Like, you can find a home for these cards if the mana you're generating is just truly like utterly colossal. Like, Mana Geyser is usually spend 5 mana, get like 16. And
Yes.
like, yeah, I'll spend a card from my hand to get 11 free mana. Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, because basically that one spell is going to kill an opponent.
Right. Like,
Or it's going to be used towards killing at least one opponent.
yeah, there's like the things you can do with 16 mana are a lot more than the things you can do with 5. So like,
Yep.
yeah, if you Mana Geyser kind of gets the pass for being like just absurdly efficient with this. Seething Song, like, you have to find a really really good fit for Seething Song in order to be able to run it profitably. I have it in Circara because Circara, when she gets online, your like cards, the number of cards you're spending doesn't matter. Like, when you start hitting the Dragon's Approaches or the Sizzles or the, you know, End the Festivities, like, doesn't matter. You're spending cards, like, you're impulse drawing 3, and one of those is going to hit all your players again, and you're going to impulse draw 3 more off that, and like, at the end of the turn, you're going to run out of mana long before you run out of cards. And like, Seething Song, you know, at that point, it doesn't really cost a card from your hand. It costs a card from one of these 8 cards that's going to get exiled at the end of turn, and you're going to lose forever. So it costs nothing in that. At that point, it's just free mana. So like, Kara can get away with the Seething Song, the Lotus Petal stuff.
I think I have Seething Song in Third Path Iconoclast just because I need the storm count up. I need mana to keep doing what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, you can make a case for it in Iconoclast. I have a weird subset of the burst mana cards in Viashino's Slaughtermaster.
That's just a weird
So
deck.
like, it's a really weird. Like, I don't run Seething Song. I don't run Pyretic Ritual or even Dark Ritual. Like, I think that the 4 cards I run are Simian Spirit Guide, Rite of Flame, Tinder Wall, and Lotus Petal, because those are the 4 cards that can power out the Slaughtermaster on turn 1. And it's possible for a turn 1 kill if I have 2 of those in hand and a couple other key cards. But mostly, like, if I can get the Slaughtermaster turn 1, then the turn 2 kill becomes really kind of effortless. So, like, those 4 in the Slaughtermaster deck do work, but, like, I don't run any of the others. So, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm just going to leave you with, like, you have to, because it costs a card, you have to be very, very conservative about which decks you're putting them into, because they're a lot worse than they seem.
Yeah, it's very easy to get distracted by the picture in the text box that shows 5 red mana symbols.
Right.
Like, oh my goodness,
Right.
look at what I get. But yeah, you're right. They have to have homes.
Yeah. If Seething Song added 5 red mana and drew me a card, I would play it in more decks.
Oh, solid. Yeah, that'd be a great card.
Right? Why doesn't Seething Song cantrip?
Can't imagine.
So Skirchilla will let you get lands that you've cycled away already, or lands that you've looted into your yard from other card draw effects, or even lands that your opponents milled for you. You know, those evil opponents who are trying to stop you from winning the game. Skirchilla will also hit lands that let you fetch for other lands, like Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse. Skirchilla, a Maestress Theater, every turn gets you a basic and some life, you know? So yeah, play Skirchilla. Pals will like you. Alk will like you. Jury will...
They will be your
Jury
friends,
thank you.
for sure.
Skirchilla is its own type of ramp, its own type of acceleration, just like it has its own land packet.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's nice that we have a creature that fits into a land package and a ramp package.
So good.
It's so good.
All right.
All right. Well, that is some good stuff that is ramp. Like, we got a little bit of everything. We got some auras, some rocks, some cost reducers, some instants and sorceries. We got a little bit of the whole spectrum of what the game has to offer, which is understandable. I mean, the commons fit into every single set, every limited environment, but there's bound to be things that are not ramp. And I think Dave has a list of those. What do you got for us?
I would love to tell you about things that are categorically not ramp. I see a lot of people put some of these cards into their like ramp package in their decks, like in the ramp like section, and then they say, I have like 7 ramp cards. I'm like, no, you don't. You have 3 ramp cards and like 4 cards that don't ramp. So I'm going to tell you what those are. There's a bunch of cards that will. So we talked about a kind of ramp is fetching, where you search your deck for a certain land and you put it into play. That's ramp. That accelerates you. That increases your land count. There's a bunch of cards that will pull a land out of your deck and put it into your hand. Things like Horizon Spellbomb, Gate Creeper Vine. There's the new one in One Phyrexia that either does that or proliferates. Something roots. So yeah, I forgot the name of it. The one mana green sorcery. Either get a land out of your deck, put it in your hand, or proliferate.
Yeah, Carnivorous Canopy.
No, that's the disenchant.
Let me see if I can find this.
The ramp. Okay.
Oh, it's the one that I didn't like, that Brad liked.
Yeah.
Hungry Roots? Thirsty Roots? Something like that. I don't know.
Thirsting Roots.
Thirsting
Roots?
Choose one.
Thirsting Roots.
Search
There
your
we go.
library for
We
a
got
basic
that.
land card, put it in your hand, or proliferate.
Yeah.
Single green mana. Yep.
Thirsting Roots, Horizon Spellbomb, Gate Creeper Vine. These cards are going to put lands into your hand. They are not going to put lands into play. These cards are fantastic for fixing. They will not ramp you. So those aren't ramp. There's a category of rocks that do the same thing, where they don't increase the amount of mana you have. They just change the colors that you have access to with your mana. Prophetic Prism is not a ramp spell. It's just fixing. Arkham's Astrolabe, great card, not ramp.
Yeah.
Chromatic,
Almost busted. It's a good card.
incredible card, not ramp. Chromatic Star, not ramp. All of those things are still just fixing. There is a category of cards. These are sort of like adjacent to mana dorks. This is a category of cards. These are like creatures that you can tap to put an extra land into play from your hand. And this feels a lot like fetching, because it's a land that you're putting into play. It's not coming from your deck. It's coming from your hand. And like, I really hesitate to call that ramp. The reason that I'm hesitant about that is that, like, it's pretty easy to imagine a situation in which, you know, you play the Llanowar Scout on turn 2, and then on turn 3, you make your land drop, and then you tap it for another land drop, and now you're at 4. And on your 4th turn, you miss your land drop, and you're at 4, and your Llanowar Scout does nothing. Like, if you find yourself in this situation, like you haven't actually ramped yourself really. It functions more like burst mana. It's like, sure, you had 4 mana on turn 3, but then you had 4 mana on turn 4 as well. Like it's more like a little pyretic ritual thing that you did on turn 3, and then right. So yeah, I think that it is possible for these cards to function as ramp-ish cards, only if you are consistently hitting every land drop. I've got a Sivrus deck. Sivrus is the Baldur's Gate commander that taps, where you, for each opponent, you mill a card, and then the opponent will choose whether that card stays in your graveyard or gets put in your hand.
Yep.
Opponents will always choose to put lands into your hand.
100% of the time.
You will consistently have 8 lands in your hand all the time. This deck is never, ever missing a land drop. So if you can stick a Walking Atlas, you're going to get a second land drop every turn. And that's going to ramp you nonstop. So sometimes these cards can be ramp. A lot of the times, unless your deck is like very specifically designed to just constantly have lands in its hands all the time, then these aren't really ramping you. They're more like burst mana than actual ramp. So I'm gonna caution you against those, sort of as a general rule. Those are the things that I would say are not ramp. I'm vaguely sort of tossing burst mana in here as like, it feels weird to say these are like burst mana. That's not ramp when Liam just said burst mana is a kind of ramp. It is kind of not reliable ramp. It's, again, much like burst mana, you need to have a deck that's very specifically tailored to want to do these things and to profit from doing these things. So
yeah, like you kind of said, Astrolabe, Chromatic Star, Prophetic Prism, those are all amazing mana rocks. They're all amazing mana fixing.
Yes.
But I don't play very many of them. Like,
yeah,
hardly at all. I don't even know if I have Prophetic Prism in a deck. I have 2 decks that have Astrolabe and maybe 2 decks that have Chromatic Star. But those decks care about artifacts and or artifacts going to the graveyard, less about the fixing.
Yep.
They're really good for what they do, but they're just not... Like, you're using Astrolabe as a cantrip. You're using Chromatic Star for affinity or a cantrip. You're using Prophetic Prism as a cantrip that you can flicker. Like, you're rarely using them to fix your mana.
Exactly. Yep.
So I don't even hardly consider them mana. Like, their mana ability is like 3rd on the list of what they can provide to a deck.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree.
So yeah, we don't have a ton that aren't ramp, but I think what we have are things that folks can get confused with. Like, they sort of rely on these things to be ramp, and when they don't work out, they get frustrated, because I know I've been there before. You just kind of have to understand what it's doing, kind of like what you said, what the deck wants it to do and what it's doing in the deck itself.
Yeah. So,
but I think now that we kind of have... Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to agree with what you said. Like, make sure that you are being very intentional about these decisions. Like, I'm not
That's
saying
a good way to put it.
Don't run Walking Atlas. I'm saying make sure you have a really good reason to play Walking Atlas. I'm not saying Astrolabe is a bad card. I'm saying make sure you have a good reason to run Astrolabe.
Yeah.
Right. And when those reasons are good, those cards are very good.
Yes.
You will be paid off for using them.
Yes. Yep. I'm going to categorize these the same as, like, Faithless Looting. Like, Faithless Looting, tremendous card. It is really bad in a generic red deck. Like, you have to be very...
it is not value.
You have to be very intentional about where you're putting Faithless Looting if you want to get value out of it.
That's a very good analogy. Like, they are very much like Faithless Looting. On the surface, you're like, heck yeah, this is nothing but super sweet value. And then you play it and you're like, holy crap, what else can I put in this, in this slot?
I've seen so many people just, like, mindlessly jam Faithless Looting into their red decks because, like, it contains the word draw 2 cards and it's banned in, like, modern, and that means it's like a monster powerhouse of a card, and they're playing it in like this sort of, like, generic Gruul Stompy deck, and they're like, why does my hand so much smaller after I Faithless Looting? And I was like, buddy, like, that's what it does. Like, where's the Arrogant Worm? Where's the Blood Mad Vampire? Like,
come on,
you're not doing nothing with.
You're just throwing cards away.
Yeah,
what's going on?
Maybe if I flash it back, it'll be no. Stop. That won't help you.
Hold on, man. I'm working on something. I got it.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
What you got is help, man. This is
You just hell bait yourself, buddy.
this is not these are
That's
not the droids
awful.
you think they are. Like,
We're gonna keep playing PDH over here. You just hang out and do nothing.
yeah.
Yeah, that is actually a really good analogy for those cards. That's a good one.
What you got is hellbent.
All right. Well, what you
I'm
got
still
is
laughing.
hellbent.
That's great.
That's a sticker, a bumper sticker, or something right there. All right. So we got some types of ramp. We got some types of anti-ramp. I think we're going to break it down, kind of go through the colors and see how each individual slice of the color pie contributes to mana acceleration. What do you think, Liam? You want to start us off with the white slice?
Yeah, sure. So the white slice of the pie is actually probably the most straightforward. The white slice really relies on a lot of the what my co-hosts have called cost reducers and what I am calling cast reductors because I can. So these cast
Because I'm a judge and I can do that.
because I'm allowed to. So these casting reductors tend to be where white gets most of its ramp or acceleration from. Outside of those, you're looking at mana rocks, which tend to be colorless and go into any deck, and I feel like that's kind of like the cheap response, the quick answer.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel like doing white things, Core Cartographer and or Scouting Hawk are pretty good. Those do white things really well because they do plains things really well. But outside of doing white things to flicker creatures that search for plains, you're looking at mana rocks or cast reductors.
Yep.
It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy.
And I think that's really about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, ramping is not something white is known for.
It is not known for many things, Brad.
Right.
I'm sorry.
True.
Brownie, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
But Dave, why don't you tell us about the blue cards?
I would be
What do blue
delighted
cards
to
do?
tell you about blue cards.
Tell
Blue
us about
is
blue cards.
largely kind of similar-ish in that if you're in mono blue or blue X and you want to do a lot of ramping, you're probably going to just end up using a lot of rocks. But there are a couple other weird options that we need to talk about. They're pretty niche, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
Blue has an entire suite of mana dorks. Some of them will tap to add colorless mana. Things like Apprentice Wizard, I think is Apprentice Wizard? Did I ever try common printing?
Apprentice Wizard?
Yeah.
I shall check for you.
Like I associate Apprentice Wizard with like the quintessential. Yeah, it's been common. Yeah, Apprentice Wizard,
Oh yeah, Double Masters, 4th edition.
fourth edition. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is one of my first cards I ever owned. Yeah, so Apprentice Wizard is a 3 mana 0/1 that lets you pay a blue and tap it to add 3 generic mana. Yeah, 3 colorless mana to your pool. So it's kind of like a really bad Urgolem's Eye, but I mean, it's an Urgolem's Eye that only costs 3. It's cheaper than Urgolem's Eye or Sisay's Ring. Some of these blue mana producers are just like sort of like weird wizards that will add a lot of colorless mana. A lot of the wizards that add mana, a lot of blue's mana dorks will put weird restrictions on how you're allowed to spend that mana. Some will say like you're only allowed to use it on instants or sorceries. A lot of them are like sort of keyed into the set mechanic. Like I remember one in Kaldheim that you're only allowed to spend this mana on instant sorceries or foretold cards. You're like, okay,
It's very specific.
I get it. Like I get the gimmick. This is for the foretell
Yeah.
deck. Like, you're only
What
allowed
about
to
the
spend
one-
this.
What about the one from Innistrad 3 that gives you instant sorceries or disturb cards?
Yeah, instants or sorceries or
There you go.
disturb cards. Yeah. So like, we have a lot of these. Every time there's a new like alternate casting cost, we get a little blue wizard that can pay for instants or sorceries or that alternate casting cost. So there's a handful of those. I tend to not like those because I like my mana to be much more like free.
Flexible.
Yes, flexible is
Yeah.
the correct word. So the other blue thing that we have to mention is Dreamscape Artist, because Harrow is a monster of
And
a card.
let me ask real quick. You said Dreamscape Artist. WTF even is this card?
Harrow is just a monster of an acceleration card. It's
Yes.
3 mana, instant speed, sacrifice a land, search your deck for 2 lands and put them into play untapped.
Wild.
So if one of the cards that you sacrificed was one of the lands you tapped, then this effectively has only cost you 1 mana.
Mm-hmm.
Because it costs you 3 and then you get 2 back, which is
Right.
crazy. Like that's
That's good rate.
that's a monster rate for because they come in untapped, which is nuts. And so Wizards, so we have this card Harrow, which does this, and Wizards was like, we should make a spell shaper that does Harrow thing. Would it make sense to put that in green? And then Gavin showed up, and he's like, what if it was blue? Like,
he just kicked in the door like, what if it's blue, guys?
Right. Just came in through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man. Is like, blue needs this. Blue gets all the good things. And everyone's like, Harrow is green. What are you on drugs? And he's like, to blue, and they're like, all right. So now
Yes, sir.
blue has the spell shaper for Harrow, and it's a 2-mana 1/1 creature that lets you pay 3 mana, discard a card, sacrifice a land, search your deck for 2 lands, and put it into play.
Yep.
Yeah, just turns any card in your hand into Harrow, which is kind
Crazy.
of berserk.
Yeah.
Really good in a Rune Crab deck if you guys have Rune Crab decks.
I think this is like the 4th episode in a row you've mentioned Rune Crab.
I
think you're onto something.
don't mean to. It just like it pops up over and over again. Like it's such a
I feel
stupid.
like-
Of course, we have been talking about
I
lands
feel like
lately.
you should
Yeah.
sponsor the CPDH Ruin Crab deck.
I have a CPDH Rune Crab
You
deck.
might.
Yeah, I've thought about submitting it to the deck list. Yeah, the what's the tryhards thing? The compendium,
Database?
the database.
Compendium.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought about submitting it to the compendium, but it's really
It's too
stupid.
much.
I've
That's going to be the reply. What? This is really stupid.
I have won competitive games with Rune Crab. I had a competitive game once where like I was playing against a Tetiova, and the Tetiova started to go infinite, and I was looking at their loop, and their loop was they could as many times as they wanted to gain a life and draw a card,
Sure.
but it wasn't mana positive, and I was like, yeah, man, draw. Like I was sitting there with 3 counterspells in my hand. I was like, draw as many cards as you want, bud. Like, just tell me when you stop. Like,
have at it.
yeah, like I'm on Rune Crab. I don't care. Like that's your own life total you're burning through there. Like so yeah, I won that game. It was wild.
That's
But yeah,
hilarious.
no, I've brought Rune Crab to competitive games. It's very silly. So yeah, blue has a bunch of these wizards that I don't like much, and then Dreamscape Artist, which I like a lot. I will say,
Yeah, and then we have like Val from
oh,
Baldur's
Val.
Gate
Yeah,
that is such a enigma.
I did a quick Scryfall search for those wizards, and the first one to ever pop up was the homunculus dude in Eldritch Moon. And then we got Voldalian Arcanist in Core 21, which just taps for a colorless that can be used on instants and sorceries. The first one of its type was the Kaldheim one to do Foretell. And then we got the homunculus in Innistrad 3 for Disturb. And then the Kicker one for kicked spells didn't actually show up until Dominaria United.
huh?
I was in my head, I was like, oh yeah, the Kicker one from Zendikar Rising. But no, it's Zendikar, sorry, not Zendikar, Dominaria from 6 months ago, not Zendikar from 2.5 years ago.
Huh?
Yeah,
Yeah, we have
I kind of did that too.
there's an Eldrazi one that will
Yeah, that's the homunculus from Eldritch Moon. On the
No,
back
there's-
face, it's an Eldrazi, and
No,
instants and
there's-
sorceries one less.
No, there's a cultivator drone that will tap to add a mana for a colorless spell or a colorless permanent.
Interesting.
Yeah,
We actually have a green spell shaper that lets you discard a card, and all it does is Utopia sprawls one of your lands until the end of turn, or wild growths your land until the end of turn.
yeah.
You would think that'd be the one that harrows, but
There's OG
it's the blue one.
OG Masks block had Silverglade Pathfinder, which is the spell shaper that rampant growths. It's an uncommon, and Blake has that deck built, and it is wildly entertaining.
Which one is that?
It's called Silverglade Pathfinder. Yeah, I love that deck a lot because it's like when you build the whole deck around like rampant growthing every single turn, and then also you get to do like madness things and flashback things in mono green. Like it's weird. Like escape, like just discard Voracious Typhon into this like rampant growth every
Bring
turn.
it back way sooner than you should.
Right? Yeah, like it's a really interesting deck. But yeah. I've talked about blue for a really long time, so I'm gonna pass things back to Brad here so he can tell us about black. How's black gonna ramp us?
We got a little bit in black. We've also got a a spell shaper. We got Bog Witch, which is part of that Mercadian Mass cycle. It is 2 generic and a black for 1/1. Pay a black, discard a card from your hand, and it dark rituals. So it's not permanent ramp. It's not putting lands into play. It's not tapping mana itself. Like, you have to have cards in hand to do this. You can't get yourself hellbent, But that's one of the few things we have. We also have things like Soldevi, Adnate, that you can sacrifice another creature to add black mana equal to its casting cost, that sort of thing. Black is very, much like the other things Black does in this game, it is very specific or very stubborn about what it wants to let you do. Like for the Spell Shaper, you have to have cards in hand. For the Adnate, you have to have other creatures on board. The only one that's even sort of semi-useful, and it's actually kind of fun because they're back in the day, and there's 4 different arts for this card in Fallen Empire, and that is Basil Thrall. You can sacrifice it to, you got to tap and sacrifice it to add 2 black mana to your mana pool. So it's a sort of dark ritual on a body. It's only a one-time use. It's not a mana dork or anything like that. It's not you can't repeat the process, but that's generally what we have. It's basically Black is sort of in between. Black's ramp is in between rituals and mana dorks. Like, a lot of their mana can be produced by creatures if you meet other requirements, if you meet other steps along the way. So there's not a ton. Black, a lot like white, you're going to have to focus a lot on your rocks. We got Infernal Idol, which is nice, that new one from Jumpstart. That's very nice, very, very much helped out mono black decks. But other than that, you're going to use your big colorless rocks, your Honored Heirlooms, your Bounder's Ornaments, your Guardian Idols, all that sort of thing. Pretty much most mono black decks I've seen that try to be competitive run an inordinate amount of mana rocks, especially like Everflowing Chalice, just anything that will help typically pay the extra commander tax, because a lot of mono black commanders are very threatening, so they die a lot. So you need something to help with that commander tax. So ton of rocks. I talked about the Adnate and the Bog Witch and the Basil Thrall and all that stuff. I can't tell you what decks run them because they're just not very good. They're fine. They're fine for one-time use creatures. Maybe if you have a way to loop them or bring them back, that sort of thing. What were you going to say?
I can tell you exactly which decks run Soldevi, Adnate, and Basil Thrall.
Okay, do it. I need to know.
Decks piloted by Sir Conrad the Grim.
Okay. I can see that.
My Yargle deck also runs them.
Oh,
Conrad and
it did.
to
Yargle.
ramp out.
It did.
To ramp out the Yargle?
Yeah. Shira used
What'd
them.
they get cut for?
It's in limbo right now, so I think that Soldevi will make it back in the deck, but I don't know that Basil Thrall will.
Oh, okay.
But
that's good to know.
Shira also used both of them.
Excellent. Yeah, and I was going to build a Lazotep Chancellor deck, and that could use Bog Witch, because it discards and then it helps you pay for the extra 1 to amass 2 and that sort of thing. So very specific uses, kind of like you were talking about with the bursts. But overall, Black just doesn't have a ton. It's got ways to generate its own color of mana right away and in very small chunks. So you kind of need to know what to do with it. That's all I really got for Black. Am I missing something here with the Black slice of the pie?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I go ahead.
Should we talk about Bubbling Muck?
I guess is one I looked at earlier when we were doing the show notes.
I guess we didn't talk about High Tide in blue, so we could probably skip Bubbling Muck in black.
That's fair. I think
We've said their names. Their names are now in part of the show. We can move on.
There we go.
All right.
Bubbling Muck is $3. Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm
$3.22.
I'm waiting for them to downshift Reign of Filth. That's really what I want.
Which one is that?
It's an Urza Saga uncommon for a single black mana instant. It says all of your lands have the ability sacrifice for a black.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. And it's cool how, like, at higher rarities, Black has really good ways to add a shitload of mana to your mana pool.
Yeah.
Just not really at common.
Yeah.
Or a ton of black mana specifically to your mana pool. Just not so much at the common level.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple cute, like, sacrifice a creature to get its mana value in black. Like, sacrifice, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Some kind of offering.
And there's like Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, that sort of thing.
Tons of burst mana stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Black.
That's kind of where. Go ahead.
Black used to be the color of burst mana before Wizards figured out the color pie and moved it into red. It was black for a long time.
Yeah, it's funny because with how grindy black decks or black X decks are, they had a lot of, like you said, they had a lot of burst mana for being such slow decks. And then they figured it out, and they don't get that anymore.
Yeah.
But the color that does get a lot of burst mana is red. What do you think, Liam? You got some red ramp for us?
When you're in red, you have two options, burst mana and mana rocks. Red does not have a lot of ramp spells like green does. It does not have all of the little sacrifice goodies that black does from the good old days of Magic. And it doesn't even have the WTF heroes that blue gets. All it gets are the mana rocks that white also has access to, that all the other colors have access to, and there's burst mana. We mentioned some of them earlier, Pyretic Ritual, the Goblin Ritual that I'm going to keep calling the Goblin Ritual, Mana Geyser, and oh gosh, I can't name them all. Someone help me out here.
What are we naming?
Red rituals.
Pyretic
Seething
Ritual,
Song.
Desperate Ritual, Rite of Flame, Seething Song, Mana Geyser, Vessel of Volatility.
All of
Yeah,
these
I forgot about that
things-
cycle.
All of these things, if you're into them, are red ramp spells. I'm going to air the same caution from earlier, where be careful as to how you're using these, because you want them to help enable stuff, but you don't want to be relying on them as the main source of ramp in the deck. It will not work out for you.
Yes, that is very good advice. You need to be very cautious with these. The way I've learned to play them in PDH, this singleton format, is I want my deck to be able to function without them, so that when I win or if I draw into them, they are just like a nice bonus.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if I rely on them, it's going to fail.
Yep, you hit
For
that
me,
right
anyway.
on the nose.
Yeah. Like, nothing feels worse than, like, trying to Seething Song your 5-mana commander out on turn 3, and then just having it catch a Doomblade. And you're like, well, all right.
I just wasted 2 cards. Awesome.
And now my commander costs 7. Like,
Yeah, now it costs 7.
Well, now
Great.
that's just Mana Geyser's turn, right?
right, yeah.
Oh, that is a good plan. I like it. All right. I think green's up next. Oh, is that me again? Sure is.
Sure
Back
is.
to you.
All right. Let's get into green. Everybody knows green mana dorks exist. They're all over the place. They're typically elves, Llanowar elves, Elvish Visionary, Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Visionary, all these other ones that I probably just made up. They tap for green. They tap for double green. Sometimes there's Sakura Tribe Spring Collar that just adds a green to your mana pool every upkeep, that sort of thing. There's Arbor Elf, Quirion Ranger, on and on and on. Like, the list is forever long about elves that provide mana in our format. So I don't think we have to go into every single one of those. Just know that they exist. And I don't know if it was the same for you two, but coming from 60 card Pauper to PDH, it was a very hard lesson to learn. Like, the mana dorks, the elves specifically, are like format staples in 60 card Pauper. And then I bring them over here and it's like they almost feel bad, if that makes sense. Like, they're just not as good. I guess it's because we don't have you can't have the density of them. I don't know what it is, but they're just not as impressive in a 100 card singleton format. What do you think, Dave? What do you think of the mana dorks?
I'm always really, like, nervous about mana dorks. Like, I think across my 90-ish PDH decks, I honestly don't think I have Llanowar elves in any of them. And the reason is that
Yeah, I can see that.
I get really squirrely about my dorks dying to pestilence.
Yeah.
Like, when I play a rock, I don't want it to be like on the battlefield. I just want to tuck it away in my mana zone, like just stack it up with all the lands that I tap, and like I don't want to have to worry about it like dying to like incidental collateral damage when someone hits a board wipe. Like, that just feels bad.
Right.
Like,
And two, like, if you spend turns 1 through 3 or 4 just dropping mana dorks, at some point you're going to have to block. At some point these opposing creatures are going to come at you and you're going to lose your mana dorks that you didn't get to use.
like
it just feels bad sometimes.
we have, in other formats, they have this like very ubiquitous saying, like, bolt the bird. Like, people will kill your rocks. Like, no one says abrade the signet. Like, I don't know why. Signets just feel so much safer than mana dorks to me. Like, we bolt.
They really do. Like, no one tries to counterspell your signet. No one tries to blow up your,
and like
whatever ring.
Probably no one's going to counterspell a Llanowar elf either. But like, pestilence is everywhere.
Yeah, it's the fact that the creature gets taken out by single target removal and also mass removal, whereas the mana rock only gets taken out by single target removal. And even then, people have to really want to take out a signet. Like,
Yeah.
Exactly. They have to go out of their way to blow up your mana rock.
There tend to be better artifacts in play. Like, generally speaking, I would rather blow up any given random equipment than any given random mana rock. And I think the only real exception would be like if my opponent's playing a 3-color deck and the only way they can produce black is on that one mana rock, I am blowing up that mana rock. 100% I'm going to cut them off a color.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But even then, like that's also like they have to have been stuck on like that's their only black source for 3 turns. I'm going to cut them off black now because, you know, they clearly haven't been able to get another source. And that kind of like kneecaps them a little bit, but also keeps them in the game.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I've run into it too where like I'll play an early mana dork, a 1 mana, you know, Llanowar Elf, Elvish Mystic, whatever.
Yeah.
And then player, you know, I'll be player 1, and then player 3 will drop some random red creature that when it ETBs, it does 1 damage to a single creature, you know.
Yep.
And I have the only creature. I'm like, well, hey, there goes my entire turn. Like, I just got time walked. It's crazy.
Yeah, no,
like it's crazy how fragile they are. Like we still have enough to like fill an entire deck full of mana dorks, but for some reason it just feels worse.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. If I'm on non-green, like I have a mono black deck that for undisclosed reasons needs about 26 pieces of ramp. In addition to its 40 lands. In that deck, my desperation for rocks is deep enough that I've gone into the Leadmere. Like I want so many rocks that I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm finding the Leadmere.
Like that too.
I'm like that's fine. I'll you know when you need it, it's there. Like if you're in green, like if you're in green, if you're on the elf plan, great, run the elves. The elves are outstanding with elf tribal synergies. If you just want ramp, like I guess there's cases to be made for Llanowar elves and stuff like Sigil Captain. Just because, like, late game, it's a 1 mana 3/3, and that's fine.
Right.
But like, I think as general purpose generic ramp, I'm very low on Llanowar elves. Llanowar Visionary is a powerhouse.
That's a beast. I love
that
it.
card
That's
goes in everything because, like, even if it
really does.
Even if it catches a fiery cannonade, you're like, whatever. Like, it replaced itself. Like
I'm not even worried about it.
Your fiery cannonade didn't replace itself. Idiot. Like, that's fine. This is totally fine.
Yeah, it drew me a card. It kept at least one opponent from attacking me.
Yeah.
So I'm fine. Take it.
The Visionary
kill
is outstanding. But, like, the Llanowar Elves by itself, I'm not super enthusiastic about.
And like the Arbor Elf, Korean Ranger, you need to have a really solid strategy or package while you're using those types of creatures that affect your lands. Or untap your creatures or what have you.
Yeah. Quirin Ranger goes really hard. That's the one that bounces a forest to untap a creature, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I have that in stuff like the Leafkin Avenger is a deck. The Leafkin Avenger is a 4-mana 4/3 that taps to add mana for every creature you control with power 4 or greater. It's like this one card can consistently tap for like 5 mana. And like just being able to untap it, like, yeah, I'll bounce the tapped forest to untap this for 5 more mana, and then I'll play the forest and tap it for another mana. Like, the fireballs get out of hand.
Yeah, I can see that. So yeah, and that's a very specific use, and it's really good there, you know. But I wouldn't be like, okay, I'm playing blue green. I need Llanowar elves and Elvish Mystics and Korean Rangers and Arbor elves, like. Maybe half of that amount, or maybe just one of those is fine, is what I'm beginning to learn anyway. Because there's just so much. I feel like a 1 mana green mana dork feels like it takes up way more slots than just one slot. Like it feels like it really puts a weight on the deck that some decks just aren't prepared to handle.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway. I think we dumped on the elves long enough. The next little subsection here in green is something Dave affectionately called Hella Fetch. And it's not fetch lands. We kind of talked about that a few episodes ago. This is about going to get lands out of your deck and put some into play, put some into your hand, that sort of thing. And we have a handful of these spells, things like Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Grow from the Ashes, Ranger's Path, Sky Shroud Claim. They will all get you at least one mana on the or one land onto the battlefield, and one land, sometimes one or more, into your hand. Perfect ramp. Like these are probably the cards where rampant growth, but these are why we call it ramp. Like they ramp you lands onto the battlefield to where you go from 3 lands on turn 3 to 6 lands on turn 4 or 5 lands on turn 4. This is what puts you ahead of the curve. It's what puts you ahead of your opponents. And I don't know that a lot needs to be said about these cards. They're pretty generically good, in my opinion. I don't run them all. I'll usually pick, Cultivate and Primal Growth, or Grow from the Ashes and Colony Heart Expedition, that sort of thing. It's not. I haven't seen a deck yet. I'm sure there is one because we have a million possibilities, but I haven't seen a deck yet that wants every single one of these, because typically once you draw 1 or 2, you've ramped enough that your deck can do what it's trying to do. And maybe that's just the types of decks I build. What do you think, Dave? Is there just like a super duper uber ramp deck that needs all of these?
Yes.
Ooh. What is it?
Vichigazi Guildmage.
Okay. I got you.
Quick story time. Years and years ago, when I was just getting into PDH, I really sort of disliked the colors green and white. I was very much a Grixis player. But I'd started on this quest to build. I was going to build a PDH deck for each color combination, and so when it came to building the deck that was both green and white, my then 2 least favorite colors, I was like, I don't want to put any effort into this. I'll just here's a Vichigazi Guildmage, 99 lands. That's it. That's the deck. Like, because whatever. Like, you get to 6 mana, you make a centaur, and then you just make more centaurs forever. Like,
yeah, forever.
Yeah. It's so like that was, and like what do you get? You're gonna kill my Guildmage? Like,
I can probably recast it that turn.
I'm gonna recast it every turn, right? So
every single turn.
So I played around with that. Like I played a game and I was like, this is actually really fun. So I rebuilt the deck. I cut the mana base down from 99 cards to 66. So it's still
cut it by a third. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's still like I think it's 47 lands and something like 20 ramp spells.
Oh no.
And yeah, like I run all of these: Cultivate, Kodamas, Grow from the Ashes, Ranger's Path, Skyshroud Claim, Primal Growth, Far Wanderings, Colony Heart Expedition, like all of it.
So you're specifically making like 4 tokens a turn.
Oh yeah.
At least.
Yeah, hitting land drop number 16 is crucial. Like that's where you need to be. So yeah,
that's where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, there's only 33 like actual non-mana spells in the deck, but they're good, and you want to be able to make 3 tokens and still cast one of them in a turn cycle. So yeah,
that's amazing. That is good to know.
Yes, I know of one deck that wants all of these. Yeah. I remade another version of that deck with Child of the Pack, which is a green-red card that does almost the same thing. So the Vichigazi Guildmage lets you spend 4 mana to proliferate, or not proliferate, populate. So you just get another token, usually a 3/3 Centaur token. Child of the Pack lets you pay 4 mana to just create a 2/2 wolf, but it's red-green.
Right.
And I made a version of that deck. I kind of did the same thing where I just started with like 40 lands, and I was like, I'm going to put in like, 25 ramp spells or whatever. I wanted that deck to feel and play differently, so in that deck only, I went really hard on mana dorks. So like all of its ramp spells are bodies, because sometimes, rarely, Legend has it. I've never seen this happen, but Legend has it. Child of the Pack has a backside, and that side is a bit of an anthem.
I seem to remember that when the card was spoiled so long ago.
Yeah, I've like I said, I've never seen it. I think it could just be a myth, but according to rumors, there's a backside of the card. And so like even in that deck though, I focused pretty much exclusively on dorks with butts. So like I still didn't go in for Llanowar Elves. I was on like, the Rose Thorn Acolytes, which is like a 2/3 mana dork. There's like there's a Dawn Heart something from one of the Innistrad sets. It's like a 2/4 mana dork. Like I went in for Ondu Giant and Silverglade Elemental and the land fetching bodies. So like I wanted them all to have bodies so that when I was finished ramping, I could turn them sideways and declare a really big attack. Because red also gets all the Trumpet Blast effects and stuff. So
Yeah, and that's one thing I've come to sort of appreciate more than your early drop mana dorks is the fetches that come on bodies, like you said, Wood Elves, Ondu Giant, that sort of thing. They feel better. Like no matter, they could, that Wood Elves could die as soon as it ETBs, but you got the land forever out of it.
Yes.
You essentially got infinite mana off that Wood Elf. No matter what happens after that, there are times where, like we mentioned, your mana dorks may never get to tap. Like you may never get a mana out of them before they die or become frozen or what have you. I like the fact that you can flicker the fetch bodies, Wood Elves, and all that kind of stuff. They're a little beefier. They're a little more expensive, obviously, for their effect and their body and that sort of thing. But Silverglade Elemental is another really good one. And I think those are just overall a little better than mana dorks, but I think they're a little more versatile, a little more universal, but they definitely have their place as well.
For sure.
My favorite thing about green, the land auras we have in green, like Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawl, Grafted Growth, Urban Burgeoning, Sheltered Area, these are all ones that will make you mana positive when you tap it. Some of them, we have a ton of them that are cheap, 1 mana land aura, throw it down, but they're usually just fixers. Like Abundant Growth, I already forgot the one I looked at earlier, but they're cheap. They go down, quick. They may even cantrip or gain you some life, that sort of thing. But typically all they're going to do is fix your mana, and they're not going to put you ahead on mana, where Wild Growth adds another one. Utopia Sprawl adds another one. Grafted Growth, I believe, adds 2 more, like that sort of thing. That's what you're looking for in a land aura. And my personal favorite one is Overgrowth. It's 2 and a green, and when you tap the enchanted land for mana, it provides 2 additional green. It's like a super duper Wild Growth. And I've only come into that one sort of recently because, I don't know, my deck building kink lately has been like huge commanders, like 5, 6, 7, 8 mana commanders. And I'm trying to get them out as early as possible, if not a single turn earlier than normal. And Overgrowth really does a lot of work in decks like that. It's huge. And the fact that it produces green mana specifically is very helpful if you need to get into a interaction war or a stack war with your Tamio's Safekeepings, your Ranger's Guiles, that sort of thing. So it's very helpful. It's very good ramp. It's probably my favorite. It's in every single deck that has green. I've put Overgrowth in, like Thrakis and Mr. Orfeo and Herd Baloth, and just anywhere that I can slam it, I'm slamming it, because if I'm playing green, I'm probably playing stuff that's too expensive to cast on a normal mana curve, just doing single land drops. So do you have a particular favorite out of these here, Liam, or do you even play land auras?
I don't play land auras too often. I definitely don't play them in upwards of 4 and 5 color decks, because at that point you should just be running fixers and a lot of rocks.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Monocolor decks, I tend to not run them. Like in mono green decks, I tend to not run them because I'm just running a lot of the sorceries. So my 2 and 3 color decks is where I run them the most. You will definitely catch me running Wild Growths and Utopia Sprawls in my Green X decks. Mm-hmm. Anything past that, it tends to have another ability like gain life or counters that I care about. In which case they will end up in my deck. Overgrowth, I can definitely see the role of it in like 5, 6 plus mana commanders that are green. Mm-hmm. I just don't happen to have any of those.
Sure, that's fair. And too,
not
like
yet.
Wild Growth is just, I mean, in some ways, it's just a better Llanowar elf. Like, it doesn't die necessarily. It's as hard to take out as an artifact is, but it produces the mana all the time that you need. So I've come around a lot to the bigger bodies that ETB and grab you land, and the land auras. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on those. But I think that's what green has: cheap mana dorks, land auras, some bigger bodies that ETB and grab you stuff, and then some all-around universal excellent ramp spells that see play in every format that they're legal in, basically.
Oh yeah.
That's why, like, Kodama's Reach will always be $2 or $3, and Cultivate will always be over $1, that sort of thing, because they're just good.
It's funny that you should mention Cultivate being good, because in EDH, hands down, it makes it into every single one of my Green X decks without question. Mm-hmm. Now that's Cultivate or Kodama's Reach, whichever one I just happen to have on hand.
Sure.
Most of my Green X decks have in the past have had both, but some of them, I had to cut like a ramp spell, and one of them got the boot. And Rampant Growth is pretty universal in all my Green X decks in EDH. I've never cut a Rampant Growth. But in PDH, I find it difficult to include anything much past rampant growth. Like, I put rampant growth in, and Cultivate and Kodama's Reach just don't do it. I'd rather just play the Nature's Laws and the 3 visits, and
I am kind of the same way
at
too.
2 mana.
I'd rather put one extra Nature's Lore type or 3 visits, rampant growth sort of thing than the 3 mana versions. Yeah.
Part of that is all my Green X commanders in EDH have always been pretty hefty on the mana, or they come down late in the game. And all my Green X commanders in PDH have always been 3 or 4 mana, where at that point, Cultivate and Kodama's Reach either aren't ramping my commander out a ton early, or they conflict with that 3 mana slot where the commander sits. And
that's a good point.
I think that the naturally lower curve of the format just encourages me to not play those cards, even though they are just objectively good.
What do you think, Dave? What's your opinion on like your Nature's Lore, 3 visits, rampant growth, that sort of thing, the cheaper ramp spells?
It depends enormously on what my commander's mana cost is.
Okay.
So like in Rabid Wombat, Rabid Wombat costs 4. So ideally, I want to hit a ramp spell on turn 2 and then cast the Wombat on turn 3. So for that, like Cultivate, Kodama's Reach are no good. They don't do what I want them to do. So instead of those, I'm on Rampant Growth, Nature's Lore, Farseek. No, not Farseek. That doesn't work in mono green. Steve, those guys. Strictly the 2 mana ones. If I need to hit a 5 mana commander on turn 4, that's when I'll hit the Cultivates and the Kodamas. Or like more broadly, like if I want a lot of mana, then the Cultivate and the Kodamas are much better for me. So something like Okame Ranger is one where I will choose the 2 mana things, because I don't need a ton of mana. I need to get up to a point,
just enough,
and then I'm all set. I can like focus on other spells. But something like Sultai Soothsayer needs to be doing a lot of stuff with its mana a lot of the time. So that one will have like the bigger ramp
very
spells.
mana intensive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now I know we're getting a little long. We got a little bit more show to get through. I just thought of this one too. What are we don't have to go super deep into it, but what are y'all's thoughts on like Coiling Oracle or Growth Spiral, those sort of things? Explore, where you can play an additional land, but it cantrips, sort of thing. What do you think of those? Do you play those a lot? Are they quote unquote good, or are they just fun?
I think in terms of Coiling Oracle specifically, it is just a very nostalgic fun card for a lot of people, and I can see any excuse to put it in a blue-green deck.
Okay.
But for that effect in general, you really need to be on some kind of land strategy. You need to be Lands Matters or Landfall, or just caring about ramping a bunch, because other than that, I've had those types of creatures burn me too many times where I didn't have a land to play, and that just feels bad. So either the decks that care about the decks that care about lands that have a critical mass, and or the decks just draw you a ton of cards where you're going to have a land in hand. Those I can also see an excuse for that being in there.
Okay, so you don't think they're just like generically good, like, oh, I'm playing Simic, I should have Growth Spiral, that sort of thing?
Correct. That's just my opinion. But they end up in a lot of Simic decks because Simic decks tend to care about lands.
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Dave?
Overwhelmingly, I agree with Liam, but I will say that I do have one deck that I put Explore into that was very different from the situation Liam just described, and that is my first black-green deck I put together was Quill Spike, and this was in like 2014, before combos were like an actual thing. But my Quill Spike deck was trying to be a combo deck. I knew that if I hit Devoted Druid, or that if I hit Cinderhaze Wretch, or if I hit a Persist creature and a Sack Outlet, I knew that I could make Quill Spike really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this deck, I wanted to ramp a bit, but what I really wanted out of my ramp was flexibility to late game, like when I didn't need the ramp. I wanted my ramp spells to instead just draw me cards and dig. So for me, like Explore was essentially like a rampant growth that cycled.
Yeah.
So like,
Interesting.
early game, like if I have the land in my hand, I'll draw a card. Like I'll put the land into play from my hand and I'll draw a card, and like I will have replaced that, and it's functioning just like a rampant growth essentially.
Right.
Or like late game, like if I don't have the land in my hand, like I'll still be very happy to play the card just for the cycling.
Yeah, because it's basically 2 mana cycle, which is the cycling cost anyway.
Yep.
Of other
And
stuff.
like if I don't hit the land drop off it, like I'm not sad because I just want the card draw. So like that deck also ran weird ramp like Edge of Autumn
Sure.
is the 2 mana rampant growth, but it only land fetches if you have 4 or fewer lands. But it cycles. The cycling cost is sacrifice a land.
Yeah, it's a very strange card.
Really weird card. Like early game, it's a rampant growth. Late game, it's a sacrifice a land to draw a card, cycling effect. But like that's what the deck wanted. The deck wanted ramp early and it wanted card draw late. So things like Edge of Autumn and Explorer fit into the deck really well at the time.
Right.
Generically, like I end up putting Growth Spiral in a lot of decks where it doesn't really belong just because the art is gorgeous.
I know.
Like,
the same way.
Yeah, like I recognize that it's not a great card, but it's a pretty okay card and it's beautiful, so like that's good enough. Like
Yeah, it's the epitome of Simic. Like it's really nice to look at, and it's generally okay in most situations.
yeah, like there's better ramp spells I could and probably should be playing, but I don't play them because they weren't illustrated by Seb. So
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, moving on to our last color, which is not actually color. Looks like Dave has an enormous list of colorless ramp for us to talk about.
I'm going to talk to you about how you're going to ramp in a colorless deck, which is Scaretiller. We're talking about Scaretiller. I'm contractually obligated to mention this card at least 7 times per episode. Otherwise, Sniff is going to come hunt me down and sue me for breach of contract. And I don't want to put
I told
either
you
of
not
us.
to sign that, but
I had no choice. But so yeah, we're talking about Scaretiller. Scaretiller, even in a colorless deck, so like part of this is colorless ways to ramp, and that's Scaretiller. Arcane Signet's great. Bonder's Ornament, obviously. Part of it is how do you ramp in a colorless deck, and Scaretiller still does some work in colorless decks. You can do Scaretiller loops with Terramorphic, E-Wilds. Warp Landscape is great in a colorless
Warp
deck.
Landscape.
Terminal Moraine. Like Scaretiller just goes with all of these cards really well. Wayfarer's Bauble used to be prime real estate. I used to put this card in literally everything. It's like
It really did, yeah.
it's like a rampant growth, kind of a little bit if you squint your eyes and hold it sideways. Effectively it's a 3 mana rampant growth. And like when I would put it in decks, I was evaluating it as a 2 mana rampant growth because I was thinking like you pay your 1 mana for it on turn 1. And you weren't going to do anything else with that mana anyway, and then you hit your 2 mana and you use it to rampant growth to sacrifice it. But then I'm so many times I've drawn it late game. In late game it's a 3 mana rampant growth, and like 3 mana is way too much for a rampant growth. And like there's a little bit of value out of just being able to keep that mana up for a turn cycle, and then hitting the rampant growth at instant speed at the end of a turn cycle when you didn't need the mana, but like not enough value for it to be worth it. So Arcane Signet has really kind of just pushed Wayfarer's Bauble out of contention for serious play, and I'm pretty okay with that, except in colorless decks. In a colorless deck, Arcane Signet is useless.
Yep.
Legitimately
It does not
useless.
give you any mana.
Nope.
It's literally just a rock that just sits there.
Take it out of your colorless decks. Put in Wayfarer's Bauble
Yes.
instead. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say about colorless. Play Bonder's Ornament, play Scaretiller, play Network Terminal, and
Get your mana rocks. Get your mana rocks that may care about other mana rocks, that sort of thing.
yeah.
Now, you can also, I think for the most part of this episode, we've been talking about ramp, mana acceleration, if you will, in the 99, but we can also put it in the command zone. Is that right?
You can put some
Big
ramp in
time,
the
too.
command
Like,
zone.
it's quite the payoff.
Sometimes it is very possible to build a deck with ramp in the command zone in such a way that ramp goes really hard. I mentioned Leafkin Avenger a little while ago. I actually hadn't even put that one in the show notes. It just sort of occurred to me because we mentioned Quirin Ranger. But yeah, there's a handful of uncommon creatures that are really, really massive mana dorks. I don't know. Do you guys have any of these built? Any rampy boys in the command zone?
I just took Cormella apart, but I was not using her for her ramp. It was just for her colors. So
Okay.
technically, I do not have any of these built.
I do not have any of these built.
Okay.
The closest I come is I have a Halana deck, but I don't have an Elena deck.
Okay. I'm just going to talk about a bunch of them then.
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
Cradle
I know
Clear
I've
Cutter.
played against your Clear Cutter deck, and it is wild. Just wild.
I do love the Clear Cutter deck. Cradle Clear Cutter is one of the prototype artifact creatures from Brothers War that it taps to add mana equal to its power, which is a really cool interaction with the prototype mechanic because its baseline stats as a 3/6. And then it's tapping for 3 mana, or you can play it for its prototype cost, and then it's just a 1/3 and it taps for 1 mana.
Mm-hmm.
But whichever one you do, if you start giving him axes, he will give you more and more and more mana. So
Lots of axes.
if you give this guy a Great Axe and a Bone Splitter, now he taps for 7. And if you untap him with a Quirin Ranger, now you have 14. And there's a lot you can do with 14 mana.
Yeah, there was. I think when I played against you, you had. I think you did have the Quirion Ranger, and I think you also played like Stony Strength or something where it puts a +1/+1 counter on it, and you get to untap it.
Yep, there's a bunch of those effects.
There was at one point you cast. I think you were 2 or 3 spells deep into the turn, and you still had like 36 mana, either floating or available.
Yeah, I remember that game. So like by the end of the game, I think I had Stony Strength and like Taunus's something in my hand, which is another one of those effects. It's 2 counters and untap it. And I just I played both of them, and I just kept tapping him for mana and putting more counters on him and untapping him and tapping him for mana again. And like I didn't need to do any of it. I just needed to move to a combat, but I just wanted to show you that I had 30 mana available so that I could let it all drain out of my mana pool as I moved to combat and then just kill you with an attack. Like it was
pretty much, yeah, because he was huge. He was like a 12 something. Like he was almost lethal commander damage on its own.
Yeah, he goes nuts. So Clear Cutter does crazy things. Leafkin Avenger is very similar, except instead of tapping for how much mana his power is, he taps for mana equal to the number of big creatures you have. So if you have a bunch of different 4-power creatures, Leafkin Avenger will give you a lot of mana. He is really, really interesting because he's also a mana sink. So he has an ability built in where for 8 mana he will damage a player equal to his power. So like he's like a free.
You could also throw some axes on there.
Yes, he also loves the axes. I just put the 4 Mirrodin axe. I just put that into that deck because that 4 Mirrodin axe is a 4-power creature. And then it makes the commander bigger.
Yeah.
Like that's like the perfect card for Leafkin Avenger. I'm really excited about that one. Knotvine Mystic is kind of boring. We probably shouldn't talk about it. It's just a really uninspiring mana dork. But it is 3 colors, so if you're into that.
And it's Naya. Naya's fun.
Naya's alright.
Yeah.
Elena is the other just massive absurd mana dork where she doesn't tap for mana equal to her own power like the Clear Cutter does. She taps for mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So
very specific text, but very powerful.
Very specific. So if personally, I have her partnered with Brynolin, the Moon Kraken, because Brynolin is an 8 mana 6-power creature, and I have this partnership just because I love doing I'll tap 7 lands for Spined Megalodon as a 5/7, and then it'll come in and Dragon Breath will automatically attach to give it haste, and then I'll tap Elena for 5 mana and I'll just pour it all into Dragon Breath, and now I have a 10-powered Megalodon. And sometimes I will be able to untap Elena using a blue spell, and then now that the Megalodon has 10 power, I'll tap Elena for 10 more mana, and now I'll have a 20-power Megalodon. So that feels exactly as good as it sounds.
Yeah,
if you're wondering
with
how
haste, amazing.
With haste, Dragon Breath is kind of nuts.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah, the other really, really good mana ramp that you can put in the command zone is called Beanstalk Giant, which is really unique. Beanstalk Giant's from Eldraine. It is an adventure. The adventure is sort of a rampant growth-ish effect. I think it's 3 mana to fetch a land, but it comes in untapped, I think.
Correct. Yep.
So,
just right onto the battlefield.
So yeah, it's an adequate rate for a ramp spell, and that's its adventure cost. But then its creature side is a 7 mana giant with power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. So this is one of the weird cases where like you probably want to send it, like what you cast the adventure on turn 3 to get your land, and then instead of sending it to the adventure zone and letting it stay in exile, you probably send it back to the command zone so that
just keep fetching.
So that next turn you can spend 5 mana to fetch again, and then you're at 7, and you can play it from the 4/7 from exile for its creature cost.
Yep, that's fair.
And then if it dies,
I don't think I've ever brewed around with Beanstalk Giant before.
It's really,
I'm always leery of those power and toughness are equal to yada 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 commanders.
This one's the math on this one works out really well as long as you're hitting your land drops. Like the 3 to 5 to 7, it just like it combos into itself in a really like clever way, I think.
And the 7 mana natural CMC is not too painful.
No. I mean
I guess not if you're ramping consistently.
You're casting it on turn 5 every single game.
Yeah.
And if it dies, you on turn 6 you ramp with it, and then you cast it for 7. You're always going to cast the creature for 7 from exile. And if you're casting,
the creature half should never be in the command zone.
Yeah.
Or cast from the command zone.
Yeah, and like
that makes sense.
The adventure half starts so cheap that you can play it a few times. The 4th time you cast it is when it starts to get like, that's when it would cost 9 mana. And like that's the point at which it starts to get like a lot, but at that point you've ramped 4 times. And like it's kind of this ever-present threat. Like if you kill it, I'm gonna ramp for cheap and then play the giant for 7. Like it's never going away, kind of thing.
Right.
So it's very fun. The competitive kids will hunt me down and hurt me if I don't mention Lay Weaver, but I don't like Lay Weaver, so I'm not gonna actually talk about it. I'm just gonna check the box off. I said the words, Lay Weaver.
You said the words. You have fulfilled your contract.
Now we can move on.
That's right. Good stuff. I think that pretty well covers the ramp without doing specific deck techs on different types of ramp decks, what you're going to do with the ramp, what creatures benefit from it, what commanders benefit from the ramp, that sort of thing. This is just sort of like we called the episode, it's just sort of a guide to what ramp is, how to use it, where it comes from. Obviously green, probably the best color we have for ramp, but that's just sort of the case in Magic as a whole. So you just have to know what you're getting into with the colors, with the mana dorks, with the mana rocks, that sort of thing. I'll pose this question to you both. Do you just real quick, do you think is ramp sufficient in PDH outside of green? Like, I guess maybe not outside of green, but obviously green is great. We have lots of ramp in green, but as a whole, do you think ramp is something that is productive or beneficial in our format?
Yes.
Because sometimes I play and I'm just like, it's turn 10. Why did I draw that overgrowth? I don't need, need 16 mana.
Look, that's just a bug of Highlander formats. That's not, it's not a PDH specific thing.
That's fair.
I have a bunch of decks that are honestly really excited to draw overgrowth turn 10 so that I can cross that 16 mana threshold. Like my decks are like kind of, there's a very special place in my deepest inner heart of hearts for like the just big, stupid, brain dead, massive. I'm going to cast Scaled Worm, and that's my whole plan.
And that's it.
I haven't thought beyond there, but like the Scaled Worm is coming. But
that is definitely happening.
I love those decks, so yeah, I love ramping. I ramp hard.
No, I definitely enjoy ramping. I have figured out that the decks I build that want to ramp really hard are the Thrakuses, are the Herd Bailoffs of the world, where once they're on the board, your game plan focuses solely on them. So once they're on the board, it feels bad to draw an Overgrowth. It feels bad to draw a Nature's Lore when you should be casting aggressive spells or putting +1/+1 counters on your commander, that sort of thing. So I need to figure out a way to ramp to a certain point and then to get those out of my library.
Have you considered Edge of Autumn?
You did, yeah. You mentioned that to me in the Discord, and I think the next day, I've been twice to the LGS since we had that conversation, or since you mentioned it to me. And 1 million cards at this LGS, they do not have an Edge of Autumn.
Oh, what?
I haven't ordered it yet. Yeah, right?
There's like a bad ramp spell that cycles. It's like a 3-mana rampant growth with 2-mana cycling. Like if this is a consistent problem for you, I would get that, and I would lean into like the Explore cards.
Good deal. I like that. Yeah, I've definitely cut down the ramp quite a bit. I'm down to like pretty much just wild growth and overgrowth, and then as many green draw spells as I can reasonably fit.
Yeah, that sounds like a functional ramp package.
All right, does that ramp up our ramp conversation? But we do have a listener question for the week, Liam, don't we?
Sure do. From Dakota in Discord, they want to know, what cards in PDH do you begrudgingly accept are good? What about them do you not like? I'll pass it off to you, Brad.
Oh, back to me. All right, I got two. I think one will be obvious. The second one will be obvious. The first one is Dragon's Approach. I understand that it's good. I don't play any of them. Just, I don't know. There's something about it. I'm just like, yep, that's what it does. Here comes another one. You know, maybe it's the you can have as many as you want in your library text that bothers me, because they're just, if you play against the Dragon's Approach opponent, they either cast 0 or they cast 9. There's no in between. You don't just see one or two of them. You see none of them because of variance, or you see all of them. And it's just repetition over and over and over again. You know, when they're like, okay, untap, upkeep, draw, play a land, tap 3 mountains. You're like, okay, here we go. So, but I understand it's good. It's very, very good in certain decks. Yeah, it's got its place. I just don't particularly care for it. And the second one on my list is Malcolm. Malcolm is so strong. It is so good. It partners with so many different commanders. I even have a Malcolm deck. It's just, in the right shell or in the right player's hands, Malcolm can be oppressive. And I understand that, and I accept that it's good, but damn, it looks bad, sitting across the table from me. So that's what I got. Dragon's Approach and Malcolm. Do you got any, Dave? What do you got?
I do. So I've interpreted North Dakota's question, cards I begrudgingly accept as good, to mean cards that I don't like to play with, but I feel forced to include in my decks if I want that deck to be powerful. And for me, 3...
That's fair.
Yep. 3 cards immediately came to mind for me, and they are Counterspell. Not the category Counterspells, the actual card named Counterspell.
Yeah.
I feel like there's... I recognize that it's just the best at what it does. 2 mana for just counter any spell, no frills, no strings, no bells, no whistles. Like that's about the best
just
you can do.
No. Yep.
I just feel like it's really boring, and like when I want to play with counterspells, I would love to play with more interesting counterspells. Like I'm very happy to pay a couple more mana for like extra effects or some modality. Like I think that there's a lot of more interesting counterspells that are just intrinsically worse, and I like playing with those more than I like playing the card Counterspell.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to include Counterspell in the really good decks because I recognize it's the best. My second card is Oubliette. What a waste of cardboard. What a tragedy of functional errata.
Yeah.
They didn't have to do us like this, but they did. And now
they did us that way.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. Oubliette's really good.
Yeah, I know. That's why I hate it.
It's one of my favorite cards.
It is legit like one of the best cards in the format, and that's bothersome.
Yeah. I wish it were less good.
At least it's got a color.
Yeah.
That's true. You got to be dedicated to cast it, but you're right. It just feels bad all the time.
Yeah. The other card is one that I've been... The third card I want to mention is one that I've been like taking out a lot of my decks lately, and that's Relic of Progenitus. I feel like for a while...
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. I feel like for a while this card was just ubiquitous. It was in every deck. Because like at worst it cycles, right? Like this is never a dead card. It's always, you can pay 1 to have an artifact and you can sacrifice it to draw a card. So it always replaces itself at its very worst, which is a great floor for a card to have. And at best,
Sure.
it just completely annihilates someone's entire strategy. And
At best, it wins you the game. At
Right.
worst, it draws you a card.
like that's such a good card. And like so many of my decks rely very sort of casually on the graveyard. Like I have a lot of
Yes.
like discard
That's
decks
a good
where
way
I
to put
want
it.
to be like I have flashback spells that I'll put into my graveyard and I'll just use them later. And like I have so many like things that are just like if my graveyard gets taken away, it's like really irritating, but I'm not going to lose the game over it. And like the number of times that I just, get really irritated by Relic because it's everywhere. Like I've started taking it out of my decks because I want there are decks that are going to just fundamentally rely on the graveyard. Things like Ruination Rioter or Autoumi. And like
Mhm.
I want them to have a chance. Like if someone sits down at a table with
Yes.
me with Autoumi, like I don't want them to be like sorry, you idiot, like you don't get to do anything ever. Like you should have thought of that before Relic of Progenitus got printed, stupid.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be that guy. Like if someone shows up with an Autoumi deck, I want to let them do things. I want to let them play the
Yeah,
game
'cause
and like
it's
see what
fun
happens.
for people to do things.
Yeah. So like
And I think Oubliette and Relic are really good choices here for this question because they are specific cards that you think about when building a deck. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm putting this deck together. What if Oubliette comes across the table?
Exactly.
What if Relic? Like, they may not be in your deck, but you certainly have to worry about those two specific cards.
Right. Like every time I build a black deck, I'm like, get better include Feed the Swarm because otherwise I lose to
Yeah,
Oubliette.
exactly.
And it's like, I don't want to have to think that every single time, but like here we are.
Right. But here we are.
These
Yep.
cards are these cards staples?
Oubliette? Yeah. I mean, define staple.
Relic, Feed the Swarm.
I think they're like identifiers of the format, you know?
Yeah.
I would say at competitive levels, they're definitely
Oh, yeah.
staples.
Counterspell, Oubliette, Relic, absolutely competitive staple.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are the three I wanted to talk about. I'm gonna pass this over to Liam. We'll hear about Liam's salty
Yeah,
cards.
the things that I begrudgingly accept as part of the format are going to be tutors. Just across the board tutors. This is going to. I don't really know how to define tutors because you could do broad strokes and be like anything that fetches something out of your library, but then that includes ramp, and I don't want to include ramp in that. I want to say the things that go get an artifact of one or less, so the things that go get an enchantment, or the things that go get a card. Like those things irritate me because if you're including them, generally speaking, you have a few targets in mind that you are going to get nearly every time. And that kind of removes the random factor from gameplay that is expected in a singleton format.
Yeah, if those cards are in your deck, it's because they are a second, third, or fourth copy of a specific card.
Exactly. In particular, I feel like in our format, the transmute cards are big offenders of this.
Sure.
You could make certain exceptions. Like you could argue that like Trinket Mage, while a very well-known combo piece / duplicate of certain combo pieces, could just be a way to fetch a Wayfarer's Bauble.
Right.
But it's also a way to fetch that Relic of Progenitus.
Usually it gets your Relic.
And I'm just like, just removing that random factor. Like I'd be okay if the way that I use Trinket Mage whenever I see it is I just search the deck. Whenever the first one drop artifact I find is the one that I'm fetching. And I like doing a little bit
I usually have people on the Saturday streams that are like, I'm gonna transmute for 3. Let me just go see what I got. Like they don't have anything specifically in mind because the deck is tuned down. They're just like, let me go see what I can get.
That also irritates me, and it's nothing about the players. It's that these cards, when used properly, or what's generally accepted as properly,
Sure,
have one or two things they are getting, and if you are using them, or you get to a point in the game where like you've already seen their targets, they're in your graveyard, they're in your hand, and you don't know what else you can get with them, it adds a bunch of meaningless time to the game. So just generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of tutors for a multitude of reasons. You will generally not catch me playing them unless the deck is intentionally spiky and competitive, or I'm like, I run 7 1-drop artifacts in this deck. Here's a Trinket Mage. And whenever it happens, it's just going to be the first one I find when I'm searching the deck.
The first one I
like,
get.
Yeah, it's very literally like, I'm just not a huge fan of them.
I will say that we all make an exception. You should run Demir House Guard in all of your decks so that you can tutor for Scaretiller.
Booyah.
It just makes sense.
All right.
It just makes sense. What's better than one Scaretiller? 2 Scaretillers.
Yeah. I mean it's a staple in my Aranis deck. So you can have Aranis and then you tutor for the Scaretiller, and yeah. You got to Scaretiller your Scaretillers so that you can
You do.
Tiller the Scared.
Yeah. You got to tiller the scare and scare the tillers.
Yep.
Whew. All right. I think I pushed this a little longer than normal, but is there anything you guys want to add to the ramp conversation? Anything we missed? Any cards that popped in your head while we were chatting about other stuff?
Nope.
If not, I'm going to move on in to the
Nothing
outro. Well, good deal. All right, we're going to get to a few more things before we wrap it up for the week as usual. If you need more Pauper Commander talk or have any questions about the format, you can email us. You can email the show at thepdhpod@gmail.com. You can head on over to the PDH Homebase's website. That'll take you right to their Discord server. You can find Liam on Twitter at Pauper Command. You can find me on Twitter at Pauper_B. And literally everywhere else PDH is being talked about, you can find Dave as the Alcadron, even at 7-Eleven sometimes, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put all the links down in the show notes. You can find us there. And then, I guess as this brings episode 36 of the PDH pod to a close, we want to give a big thanks to MTG Brad for letting us use their original music for the show. And from all of us in here to everyone out there, brew a deck, fuel those manas, and we'll see you in about a week. Peace.
Cheers.
See ya.
I brought Pauper decks to the party. Pauper. I brought Pauper decks to the party.